Welcome to the American Lit Nation, where students of American literature can get tutoring without leaving the comfort of wherever they are. We are here to help you, the struggling student, figure out and comprehend our American literature. This course starts with early American literature, an exploration and study of Puritan literature, and concludes with 20th century literature many lessons down the road. We will upload as many videos as we can over the next 9 months. Yes, you heard me correctly, the next 9 months. This is going to be a full exploration of American literature and maybe even some tutoring on writing as well. So please subscribe so you can be notified anytime a new video is posted. It would also be great if you would press the like button. These two actions will go a long way in helping this channel to stay alive and in spreading the word to help others just like us that struggle sometimes with reading comprehension and those crazy questions we have to deal with on standardized assessments. We really love teaching American Lit and hope we can help you get a better grasp of the analysis and skills necessary to dissect each piece of literature we study. You will greatly benefit from your engagement in this course. Now let's get to it, and welcome to the American Lit Nation.
Here we go. Part 2 of Act 1, the Overture continued. But the people of Salem in 1692 were not quite the dedicated folk that arrived on the Mayflower. A vast differentiation had taken place, and in their own time a revolution had unseated the royal government and substituted a Wanta, which was at this moment in power. The times to their eyes must have been out of joint, and to the common folk must have seemed as insoluble and complicated as do ours today. It is not hard to see how easily many could have been led to believe that the time of confusion had been brought upon them by deep and darkling forces. No hint of such speculation appears on the court record, but social disorder in any age breeds such mystical suspicions, and when, as in Salem, wonders are brought forth from below the social surface, it is too much to expect people to hold back very long from laying on the victims with all the force of their frustrations. The Salem tragedy, which is about to begin in these pages, developed from a paradox. It is a paradox whose grip we still live, and there is no prospect yet that we will discover its resolution. Simply, it was this. For good purpose, even high purposes, the people of Salem developed a theocracy, a combine of state and religious power whose function was to keep the community together and prevent any kind of disunity that might open to it destruction by material or ideological enemies. It was forged for a necessary purpose and accomplished that purpose. But all organization is and must be grounded on the idea of exclusion and prohibition, just as two objects cannot occupy the same space. Evidently, the time came in New England when the repressions of order were heavier than seemed warranted by the dangers against which the order was organized. The witch hunt was a perverse manifestation of the panic which set in among all classes when the balance began to turn toward greater individual freedom. When one arises above the individual, villainly displayed, one can only pity them. Just as we shall be pitied someday, it is still impossible for man to organize his social life without repressions, and the balance has yet to be struck between order and freedom. The witch hunt was not, however, a mere repression. It was also, and as importantly, a long overdue opportunity for everyone so inclined to express publicly his guilt and sins under the cover of accusations against the victims. It suddenly became possible and patriotic and holy for a man to say that Martha Corey had come into his bedroom at night, and that, while his wife was sleeping at his side, Martha laid herself down on his chest and nearly suffocated him. Of course, it was her spirit only, but his satisfaction at confessing himself was no lighter than if he had been Martha herself. One could not ordinarily speak to such things in public. All right, before we go on, let's look at a couple of questions. First of all, let's look at how were the people able to get away with their sins? If you look in the last paragraph, this was mentioned by Arthur Miller, much in the same way that they do today, almost, or in 1950s. And then the second question is, what is the underlying meaning behind the idea that a man can accuse a woman of witchcraft? Because she, as is quoted here, laid herself down on his chest and nearly suffocated him. All right, so before you go on, let's go ahead and answer these two questions. Like I said, they come from the most recent paragraph that we read. Now for the last paragraph of part 2 and what I believe is considered the overture. Long-held hatreds of neighbors could now only be openly expressed, and vengeance taken despite the Bible's charitable injunctions. Land lust, which had been expressed by constant bickering over boundaries and deeds, could now be elevated to the arena of morality. One could cry witch against one's neighbor and feel perfectly justified in the bargain. Old scores could be settled on a plane of heavenly combat between Lucifer and the Lord. Suspicions and the envy of miserable toward the happy could and did burst out in general revenge. Now, one more question for Act 1, Part 2, and that is, what were the witch hunts really used for? All right, now that we've finished the overture, I wanted to go over the questions, share the answers with you. Check your answers if these are not what you came up with. Let's go back and fill in the blanks. Hopefully this will help you to understand it a little bit better. First question was, let's describe the mood of the people. As indicated early in the overture, they are fearful. They're fearful of the new surroundings. They're fearful of everything that is going on. And this is shown by the evidence, the line from the book that says, dark and threatening, over their shoulders night and day, for out of it Indian tribes marauded them from time to time. So in other words, they were having to constantly look over their shoulders day and night, living in constant fear of being attacked by these marauders. Okay? And who are the heathen? The heathen that we're referring to are the Indians. Now, are they really heathen? Probably not. But this is what they referred to them as back in the early settlement in the early Puritan days. Okay. Next question, based on the context clues, what does Reverend Paris do for a living? Reverend Paris is a pastor, also considered a preacher in the town. At this case in the town of Salem, and at this time in history, the preachers and the pastors in the town had quite a significant bit of power. It was almost higher than the mayor of the town, because he was the most connected, so to speak, to God, had the most education on the Bible, and was able to interpret the information and the rules that the Bible wants the folks to live by. So Reverend Paris was in fact a preacher in town. The word parochial, P-A-R-O-C-H-I-L, means anything pertaining to the church. And it's pretty just straightforward, just anything that's related to the church. A lot of times through this refers to the attitude of individuals thinking that if they were in the church, they were a little bit better than other people. It's referred to as snobbish in the book by Miller. And but just know that anything that says parochial means something pertaining to the church. What was ironic about the way the Puritans reacted to the Indians? Supposedly they were God-loving, God-fearing Christians, but they primarily wanted to befriend the Indians in order to acquire their land. You probably noticed the line in the previous paragraph before this question where it said that probably they also preferred to take land from the heathens rather than from the fellow Christians. So they didn't want to take them from any other of the settlers, but they didn't mind taking land from the Indians. The last question down here, what did the Puritans think of the wilderness? They felt that it was where the devil lived. It was representative of hell. It was his last preserve. They were afraid to go into the wilderness because they were afraid that the devil would take them and they would never return. All right, next questions. According to Miller, why did the Puritans persecute each other? They did this because the Puritans were once persecuted in England. This is why they left England and came to the New World. But they also felt now, well, since we were persecuted before, we're the ruling party. We can persecute other people, and we're going to persecute those that don't have the same ideas that we do. Speaking of the Puritan leaders, of course. Okay, so others was considered to be anybody who was a little bit different. What does the candle represent in the metaphor? Think about the beliefs of the Puritans, and in this case, they held in their hands was the light of God, His final word. They're referring to the Bible. Everything that they do in their life refers to the Bible. The Bible guides their lives. It gives them the rules to live by, and a word that they lived by without question. And that was the light of their life, was the Bible and God's word. How does the belief that America is still a beacon of light exist for today? The 21st century, as Miller implies, and that simply is answered within America. There are still opportunities for adventure and success, but it is dependent on one's dedication and one's discipline. A few more questions here. How were the people able to get away with their sins? They simply blamed their sins on the witches by accusing the witches of putting spells on people. So anytime they did anything that would be considered a crime or inappropriate behavior, before they could be blamed for that inappropriate behavior, the townsfolk would simply say, well, it was a witch that caused me to do this. And as soon as that happened, that deflected any attention towards the witches in the town rather than the individuals and their personal responsibility. So that was a way that they were able to get away with things and possibly get rid of those in the town that they felt were undesirable. Next question, what is the underlying meaning behind the idea that a man can accuse a woman of witchcraft because she laid herself down on a chest and nearly suffocated him? Well, what they're saying here is that she must be evil if she had the ability to transform into a ghostly-like being, and because of her actions was able to cause somebody to do something they would not have otherwise done. And then the last question, what were witch hunts really used for? And in this case, in this time, it was for finding scapegoats, someone to pin the blame on for some strange incidents occurring in their town. And according to Miller, this was not a whole lot different than what they were experiencing during McCarthyism in the 1950s. All right, so this concludes parts 1 and 2 of Act 1 from the Crucible, the Overture. The next parts, Act 1, Part 3, is going to pick up right where the play picks up and go from there.